right, I used the number incorrectly. I said, I think 30 something. I want to play another clip from the president referring to the states that have actually changed their election law. I think 47 introduced over 400, I think actually 450 different bills to reform elections. 19 states actually passed about 34 laws. I want to play this clip from the president yesterday speaking to this issue. Clip number 8.
It's not just here in Georgia. Last year alone, 19 states not proposed, but enacted 34 laws attacking voting rights. There were nearly 400 additional bills Republican members of state legislatures tried to pass. And now, Republican legislators in several states have already announced plans to escalate the onslaught this year.
Now, these are states, obviously, that have Democratic members as well. But he is right. There are more states poised to pass additional election reform measures to fix the issues that were exposed in the 2020 election because of these oftentimes unilateral decisions that were made by election officers and not approved by the state legislatures, which have the constitutional authority in most cases to pass election laws or establish those election laws. So again, just think about this for a moment. You have approaching nearly half of the states that have passed election reform measures. Can all of those be wrong and the president and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer be right? I don't think so. I don't think so. Again, this is all about power. All right, according to a new Labor Department report released earlier today, the Consumer Price Index rose 7% in December from a year ago. Now, hold on to your hat. That marks the fastest rate in nearly 40 years, to be exact, since June of 1982, when I was in the Marine Corps. And that makes December the 7th straight month of inflation above 5%. Now, what does that tell us? Well, here to discuss the latest report is Congressman Kevin Brady. He is the ranking member on the House Ways and Means Committee. He represents the 8th Congressional District of Texas. Congressman Brady, welcome back to the program.
Good to see you, Tony. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Happy New Year.
Same to you. I hope you had great holidays.
I did. So for those watching and listening who might not understand how inflation works, what do these latest figures tell us?
Yeah, so they're crushing, as you'd imagine, for working class families. It's 7%, highest in 40 years. What it translates in real terms is, an average family in America paid $3,500 more last year, $3,500 more to buy exactly the same things they bought the year before. For a lot of families, $3,500 is a huge amount of money. And to put it in perspective, we're always trying to get ahead, right? We always want each year to have a little more in our family budget than the year before. This past year, in effect, took families back 3 years in their gains on their paychecks because of how high this inflation is. And in truth, it has lowered the standard of living for a lot of families. Worse, there's no end in sight. President Biden and the Federal Reserve dismissed our concerns about inflation when it started in right after he was sworn in, just simply said, this isn't a problem, it doesn't exist, it won't last long. We knew that to be different. They're still in denial a bit about it. But more recently, I think even the Federal Reserve has admitted that inflation is here to stay. It's going to be higher and last far, far longer. And, for the viewers of Washington Watch, what we should be worrying about are Biden policies like Build Back Better will actually make inflation worse and make it last longer. So a lot of families are going to feel this pain, for a long time. And right now in America, if you think that the rest of the world is experiencing this, America leads the world in the highest inflation. And Build Back Better, frankly, is going to make that worse.
Well, recent survey data should be very telling to this administration when Americans are ranking inflation concerns above that of the coronavirus. As many people that have been infected by this latest variant, and as widespread as it is, they're more concerned about inflation.
And they should be, because there's no end in sight. We've seen, families obviously get crushed by this, but the reason we all ought to worry is that the small businesses that we go to in our hometowns are seeing price increases of 9% or greater on what they're buying. And most small businesses, can't swallow all that, so they're passing those prices along. They too are very worried about the inflation just catching out. What they call in economics that wage price spiral means you're caught in a really tough situation where wages go up, prices go up higher, wages go up, so you never get out of that spiral. This is what, frankly, no party should hope to see in their economy. But right now, thanks to the president, and I think voters get this, they understand whose policies are driving this. Can you imagine if Democrats in Congress fuel that inflation with another $5 trillion of spending and Build Back Better? Can you imagine how bad that will get?
Well, let's talk about that for a minute. I want to kind of, class is in session here. We got a little time to talk about this in this longer segment, and I want my viewers and listeners to be educated. This is pretty basic economics here. When inflation is driven by more money being pushed into the economy, and of course we saw the stimulus during the first outbreaks of coronavirus to try to keep the engine of the economy idling so that when it passed, it could take off. Didn't want it to sputter, didn't want it to die out. But instead of realizing it and regulating, and quite frankly, it's a tricky thing to do. None of this is easy. But instead of doing that, they were intoxicated with federal spending. So as soon as Biden came in, they pushed more money into the economy. And as you've pointed out, they will only do more damage if they're successful in eliminating the filibuster rules and then pushing through the Build Back Bigger plan.
Yeah, and it is, as you said, this is the sort of defining difference in philosophies between Republicans and Democrats, the free market Republicans and Democrats. Democrats believe in demand side economic growth, which means push as much government spending into the economy as possible. That'll raise demand and we'll have economic growth. But we believe in supply side economics, where you create incentives, lower taxes, balance regulation, where businesses invest in their workers, in expansion, in growth, in higher paychecks back into the U.S. economy. And from that, you see higher paychecks, but without the inflation that goes with it. And you see what I would say is pure growth. We saw this under President Trump and Republicans after our Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. We saw America leapfrog to the most competitive economy on the planet. We saw manufacturing jobs and investment come back from overseas. We saw wages go up the fastest, frankly. Wages for families, their household budgets went up more in 2019 than in all 8 years of President Obama and Biden. And we saw wages for people of color, for example, for women, for disabled, go up 70% faster than under Obama and Biden. So, when you lower taxes, when you give people more control over their earnings, and you encourage investment here in America and in our workers, you see under President Trump, wages went up twice as fast as prices. It's not quite the opposite, but pretty close under Biden. And that's why families are falling behind.
So, Congressman Brady, how does the Biden administration get out of this downward spiral that they put the economy in?
Yeah, I would say start with stop making it worse. Build Back Better will do that. Not only are they fueling trillions more in the economy, they have provisions that actually are going to pay people more to stay home than go back to work. By some independent estimates, almost 2 million Americans will be encouraged to leave the workforce at a time when we frankly need every worker we can get. That is a classic way to drive up inflation higher and longer. is fuel the economy with government spending, take workers out of the workforce, so you drive prices up even more. So my advice to the president would be stop anything that makes this worse.
And then, frankly, what I see from my vantage point, and I've been around a while, is that gridlock is probably the best thing that could bring stability back to our economy, meaning that Republicans take control of Congress in the midterm election, keeping the president from advancing these policies that are tanking the economy.
There is no question. In fact, we've seen an independent study that shows our economy would be growing faster and inflation would be lower if we had a Biden-free economy. So if Congress didn't, Democrats, shove through that $2 trillion COVID bill and continue to push policies that drive up inflation, that actually we'd see it lowering. And so that's I think there's a reason why the first year of the Biden presidency has been so bitterly disappointing for so many Americans, is that he hasn't made their life better, he's made it worse. And Tony, I want to thank you for your comments just before this segment when you talked about, efforts by the states on election integrity are by no means voter suppression. In fact, there's no evidence of widespread voter suppression at all. That's just the big lie. And in fact, in Texas, we'd already had nearly 2 full weeks of early voting on weekends, Sundays, and late at night. The Texas legislature made it easier to do voter ID, made it more convenient, still allows curbside voting if you're disabled and can't go into it. What the legislature did do, though, was ban ballot harvesting. It is a very corrupt practice that Democrats want to nationalize, but has no place. And it also made sure local election officials, Democrats or Republicans, couldn't manipulate the system by putting drop boxes or drive-through voting to gin up their voters. We insist on equal access to the polls for all voters. That's the right way to do this.
There is something that the president has said that I kind of agree with, although the terminology is different. He says our democracy is at risk. I mean, we're actually a republic. They don't like to talk about that, but we are a republic. We're not a democracy. And I do think our republic is at risk, but it's not because of state legislatures that are acting responsibly to ensure that elections are free and fair and that every vote, every legal vote is counted. What is putting our republic at risk is the power-hungry, Democratic, leftist-run party that is trying to take over and federalize our election system.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. We've seen, and this is my 26th year, and I love this job and have a lot of faith in this country, but I've seen more efforts to dismantle democratic institutions this year than at any point since I've been in Congress, whether it is trying to end the filibuster in the Senate, which is basically, a process that gives the minority party a voice there, whether it is nationalizing these state and local elections, defunding the police. There'll be an effort to pack the Supreme Court if they rule correctly, as I hope they do, on the abortion issue. You're seeing the Speaker of the House basically take complete dictatorial control over the House and limit, restrict, shrink the rights of minority voices in the House. And so I'm seeing so many, and now an effort to weaponize the tax code, to give Congress the ability to target any political enemy in their tax returns. That worries me as well. And so I was offended by President Biden's speech. Every American really should have been. This simply wasn't truthful.
Yes, I agree. And I would say this, I do agree with the president on this, that this is an inflection point in history. And either we will preserve this republic by being engaged in it legally and standing up to those who want to gain power for their own purposes, or we will lose this republic and the freedoms that we have enjoyed. Congressman Kevin Brady, always great to talk with you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Good to see you, Tony. Take care.